Hello, everyone. We are super excited to have all of you joining us today for a discussion on everything you need to know about hiring engineers in 2023. So this is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Carrot. The webinar will last approximately 45 minutes. We will do introductions, we'll do some panel discussion, and we have some time at the end for QA. I will say there is a QA feature in your Zoom chat. So please start entering your questions as you're thinking of it. You needn't wait until the end. After the panel, both myself and the panelists, we will head over to the Lead Dev Slack channel hiring, and we will answer your questions over there from about 12:45 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, US. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Sonal Mehta, and I use she, her pronoun. And today I'll be joined by Olga Arbitman, Jason Wodeka, and Sebastian Nilsson. We'll share our experiences and insights on this wonderful topic. So with that, I want to start with some introductions. So Olga, would you mind kicking us off?
Yes, hi everybody, nice to be here. So my name is Olga Arbitman. I'm an engineering director and a women in tech coach. My pronouns are she, her. And so I've been in engineering industry for almost 25 years, and I've been working in large corporations in New York City. And so over the course of my career, I delivered business critical projects and led multiple teams in New York Times and Bloomberg. I'm especially passionate about creating, new products, hiring talents, and helping underrepresented groups in engineering navigating their careers.
Awesome. Thank you, Olga. So happy to have you here. Jason, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Jason Wodeka. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a principal engineering advocate at Carrot these days. Through my career, I've spent a lot of time as both an engineer and an engineering manager at Carrot, at Amazon, in Structure, started my career at Microsoft. So I've worked mostly at bigger places and mostly on tooling teams. And one of the things that has been really important to me is just seeing how technology can change people's lives and change people's careers, and wanting to make sure that the tech we build is built by a big and representative group of people. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Sebastian, if you can go ahead.
Absolutely. Great to be part of this. My name is Sebastian. I'm from Stockholm, Sweden. I also have a couple of decades in software engineering. Currently, I'm the CTO of a company called NGLM, or the Nordic Gallery, and I have my main experiences within like web development and the Microsoft ecosystem, and lately leadership. And I've been working at companies like Klarna and other big companies, but also smaller startups. So one of my passions is great engineering culture, and part of that is recruitment.
Awesome. Thank you, Sebastian. Appreciate it. And a little bit about me. As I mentioned, my name is Sonal Mehta, and I use she, her pronoun. I'm the director of engineering at Intuit MailChimp. And over the course of my career, the 20 plus year career, I've led multiple teams in various capacities, both as an IC as well as a leader. And I've been on both sides of the hiring table, as a hiring manager, as well as someone who was looking to be hired. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure that we have a wonderful panel. So excited and thrilled to be moderating this discussion, which I'm sure is going to be wonderful. So without ado, let's get started. My first question really to any of you is, the cost of hiring is huge. There are two possible ways where we might miss the boat. One is obvious, where you have a bad hire. The other one is kind of less obvious, where you pass over a qualified candidate because they may not fit a certain mold or some other inherent bias that we have in hiring. Either of these are very, very expensive, not just in terms of monetary, not just in monetary terms, but also in terms of team morale, company goals, etc. So given the current economic times and the cost is even higher. What do you look for when you're hiring to ensure that you mitigate such risks? Sebastian, let's get started with you.
Yeah, I think one thing to start out with that is quite important is to really like align your company priorities, what state your company is in, and what the needs are for the company. Is it speed? Is it creativity? Is it quality? Like I said, creativity is something that sometimes is needed very much when you need to break new ground, and maybe if you just developing the needs for the company then it's more straightforward. So you need to align with the company's need, and then you need to also align on the need in the team. Like what skills do you have today, and what skills are you lacking? Where do you need to strengthen up? And that's always been the case, of course, but now it's good to always keep in the back of your mind and to align that you really need to map that, which previously maybe has not been so important to do as systematically. It's been more of a gut feeling, but now it's more important to really get it right.
Sebastian, if I can ask a follow-up question, how would you align on that? How would you go about aligning on the?
It depends on the size of the company and the structure. If it's a small company, I guess you have to take a lot of gut feeling decisions. But yeah, basically ask around with, anyone in the hierarchy or what's it called, horizontally. Is there anyone who's dependent on your team? Like, what do they see that you need? So you need to do introspection, but also get feedback from the outside and sort of compile that, and also align with other parts of the organization and see that, like, okay, I have this idea of how my requirements are, and then align, and probably trust your gut feeling very well in that way.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Jason, I believe you have something to add too.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things also I would add to that is that bringing in that early definition is critical, knowing what you're hiring for, because otherwise you get really swayed by whatever candidates come through the door and kind of how you feel about them. So instead of waiting until you've got a candidate to be like, well, is this person what we need? Know what you need before you start talking to the candidate. Even if that, and that what you need might evolve, but you should still have a sense we're hiring for these skills. And that really helps with both kinds of error, because on the one hand, it helps keep somebody who is, say, a charismatic but not what you need from walking in and then not succeeding. But it also helps you sometimes find people who are not what fit your picture, but who really fit those needs. It's like, well, we thought that we were going to get somebody who's like a big go-getter. I work in Seattle, and we frequently we love our extroverts sometimes, the big go-getter energy, but sometimes it's like, no, this person is quiet and a little reserved and technically great. It's like, that's not what you might have been picturing when you hired the role, but it's what you want. So knowing what you're looking for at the outset, I just think is the step that everybody misses, and that just sets you up for success.
Awesome. I love that. Olga, how about you?
Yeah, so I think these are all great points. I think that I would add is that, it's really interesting to also check for the environment and the culture, and is the person the right fit, right? Because I have an experience in, seeing people just having a tough times in various companies when this is in check. And one way that we can check for that is just to ask, hey, how do you structure your day? Or what are your activities throughout the day? And then it's more or less, objective. You can see how the person answers and how, they go about doing the tasks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the next question. It is around, the fact that we all probably feel it right now. Again, kind of more, given the economic situation right now, where more and more of us are being tasked with doing more with less. So when this happens, we usually find ways to balance time with quality. What changes have you made in your hiring processes in recent time to speed up your hiring, but still ensure that you hire the best candidate for the role? Sebastian.
I think one thing that you have to do if you are constricted in time is to say no earlier, to not go with, like Jason said, don't be enamored by the extrovert or the magical person. Like, really cut the ties early when your gut feeling is not right. Be more have more discipline on that level, but also I would say maybe take a step back and question the question that you asked, Sonal, and should we accept that you need to do do more with less in this case? Because I would actually maybe even go back and align internally and manage expectations and say, actually this is one area where, okay, we can do a few things to effectivize the process, but doing good hiring takes time. So here there are some things we cannot compromise on, that we just need to do right.
Yeah, that's perfect. It's kind of a trick question, right? Not, it doesn't always make sense to cut things down. Jason, you have something to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really want to challenge the assumption of doing more with less as well. But in particular, I think that the answer is they love it. Do more with less is a lovely buzzword, but the actual answer is do less, but do less of the wrong stuff. You can't do more with less. You can only do less with less. But sometimes what you're doing is not the right stuff. If you're spending a bunch of your effort on sourcing things that don't help you, that's the wrong stuff. It's effort that's being wasted. One thing that I've helped people do, which is I feel weird. I do developer advocacy, so I'm not in sales, but I feel weird because this is what we do, my company, Carrot, because we basically get in and help people with their hiring process. So one of the things I would ask is like, are there pieces of your hiring process you don't need to be doing? Do you need to be running every piece of the logistics? Do you need to be running each of the rounds of interviews? Do you need involvement in your hiring process? God, yes, of course you do. But do you need to be doing every step yourself? No, for the same reasons that you don't build your own database engine and that you didn't build your own web framework, probably. It's like find a good structure, don't reinvent your wheels, and then use that structure. So you're spending your effort on the stuff that's unique to you, which is what does your team need and what is your team's culture like?
Perfect. And that's a very, very fair point. I love what you said about it's not about doing, more with less, but it's about doing the right things. And how do you actually not do the thing that don't make sense? That is such a shift in the way we think, rather than always thinking about trying to do much, much more than we probably should. Olga, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the optimizations I saw, throughout the companies is that how there are several stages in the hiring process, and often the person needs to go toward the end, and then there is a hiring committee. One of the things I've seen is that, people just short circuit and they just, if the candidate doesn't meet the criteria for, say, the second round, then they're, save the time to the team and save the time in resources and ultimately money. So that's one of the things.
Just following up on what Olga just said, the other thing that I've seen companies do in that regard is look at those steps. Can you get rid of any of them in all cases? I've seen a lot of companies, well, we have 4 technical interviews. It's like, okay, how often has it been that that 4th one has delivered value? Maybe we don't need to put this person through 4 of the same gauntlet. Maybe we need 3 or 2, or even 1 if you can be very confident in the results. But usually you have a couple for cross-checking. But there are a lot of hiring processes just have entire phases whose whole purpose seems to be that one more person just kind of wants to touch the process, and you've got to get them no, you don't need to meet with the founder of the company. You don't need to have these 17 other people weigh in. It's like we can get rid of that step.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jason, this was one of the things we spoke when we were doing our prep call, and I know you're very passionate about it, but this question kind of directed to you, but obviously Olga and Sebastian, please jump in as well. The question is around, when hiring slows down, we often see companies fall back on safe hiring strategies that have worked for them in the past. What should companies be pushing to change even in slower periods like this?
So I think those safe strategies, one of the things that really I notice is they tend to be to put it bluntly, they're biased strategies. It's a safe strategy to hire, in the US, I say Stanford grads. I know that we're a kind of global here. So Oxford grads, whatever the local school is that, you can just hire those folks. They're great. It's like, great, but there's a limited pool of them. And are you getting the very best that school has to offer? And are they the only folks that put out good computer science graduates or whatever field? Do you need somebody with a traditional degree? Could you get somebody who has gained a bunch of real world experience and then reskilled into the field? All of these things that you do that sort of well, we know how to find a good candidate. It's like you know how to find a type of good candidate. And if you want your process to be more efficient, you're going to need to look at new types of good candidates. And that means generally hiring outside your comfort zone. That was really the biggest surprise that I had when I started looking at the data. That's one of my cool perks is, working at an interviewing company. I see a lot of interview data. And the thing that the received wisdom I had always gotten is that, well, you can go do a bigger, more diverse search and it'll slow your hiring process down. And it doesn't. It does the opposite. It turns out when you widen that search, you find more candidates sooner who can succeed in the role. So while you have to do more upfront work of building out that search, the process isn't slower because you succeed sooner. And it's like, this feels really intuitive once I figured it out, once I saw the data, but it was mind-blowing because that was not how I had thought about it for years in my career or any of the folks I had talked to. It's like, oh, well, diversity slows your process down. No, it doesn't.
And yeah, definitely not. I mean, I feel like diversity is actually the cornerstone of all of the things that we do, and very, very important in some of the things, Jason, that you said in your introduction as well, that we're building the right products in the right way. So this pretty much is like the bedrock of it. I will say, like, along that line, that actually is kind of a good segue into the question that I know, Olga, is very much top of mind for you, where it's like, how do you make sure that biases are addressed during the hiring process, right? We all know they exist, yet many companies will lack the appropriate processes to make it. So how do you make sure that our inherent bias, whether known or unknown, are not affecting from hiring, the right people and people from underrepresented groups?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And, it's really something that needs to be addressed with intention. So really, to me, it starts with education. It starts with proper training, and the companies should really invest in that. And then where I've seen kind of the best, one of the best practices is to have multiple interviewers and make sure that one of the interviewers, or hopefully both, are from underrepresented groups. Because it's very discouraging to women and people from underrepresented group to be interviewed with the panelist of all men. It's just really, it speaks a lot about the company. It speaks a lot about the company culture. But more than that, understanding and hearing the viewpoints of the women that I coach is that it just really doesn't make them put their best foot forward, right? It just doesn't really make the welcoming environment at the interview itself, which is basically leads to less underrepresented group being hired in the first place.
Yeah, no, that is really spot on. A follow-up question, and again for any of you really, is that are there any things that that you have in your company, or training or something that helps people with recognizing their own bias? Yes, Sebastian.
Not really training that I've seen, but I think just in general when you onboard people to your company and to the hiring process, that you bring this up. Because I think the key to this, the most important first step, is to just have it in the back of your mind, like the little angel on your shoulder talking to you in your ear every time you read a CV or you interview someone. Like, just think about, like, how am I judging this person? Like, is it cultural? Is it introvert versus extrovert? It can be, simple as that. Like that's where a big misalignment could come. And, bring in people, like you said, from different backgrounds, but I could say even like different profiles, like just bring in a introverted person to interview, maybe just sit along, maybe don't expect them to be too much like verbal, but, just play them in when needed. But I've experienced many times that those kind of profiles can actually identify things that maybe other types of people don't see. So just be, vigilant about it.
Yeah, I feel like we can do a whole talk on D&I, specifically even just with hiring, right? There's just so much to unpack in this. Jason, I believe you have a thought.
Yes. So this is also a place where structure is a really big thing. Like I was saying at the beginning, the idea of knowing what you're interviewing for ahead of time, and then not allowing stuff that isn't part of that structure into the interview. Because a lot of the time, if something isn't what matters, if it isn't something that's important, then the question has to be during the interview debrief, during the process, why are we bringing this up? And the answer is always one of two things. Either, well, it doesn't matter and I'm giving voice to a bias, in which case, great, you're recognizing a bias. Or it does matter, we need to update the thing. Like sometimes what you're like, wait, no, this really does matter. It's like, okay, then we need to figure out how to get it into what we're assessing. We need to figure out how to look at other people for this fairly, not just because this one person kind of twigged somebody's weird sense. Because like those weird senses, they're great. Humans are these incredibly well-tuned pattern detectors. The problem is we're also incredibly oversensitive pattern detectors, and we see patterns that aren't there, and we call that bias. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we're seeing real patterns and not fake patterns. And I find just that structured interview feedback, that thing of asking people what to do. I actually did a talk on this at Lead Dev in London, and that's one of the biggest things we discovered is structured interview feedback, asking people to write down individual questions, because when you just say yes or no, everything gets coupled in together. But when you're like, well, how was their coding experience? How are their communication skills? How, one of the things that we discovered at Carrot is we assess communication skills and communication fluency, like a language, separately, because generally people adapt to each other's accents. But if somebody has trouble putting structured thoughts together, that's more of a skill they need to develop. And before we separated them out, we always got, if somebody had a very different accent than their interviewer, they would never get a high communication score. But once you separate them out, it's like, oh, this person had really clear thoughts. I just had trouble understanding them. It's like, okay, great. That's adaptable. We throw out the accent score. But by asking the interviewer to separate it, we have better data about, okay, this person is or isn't clearly composing their thoughts.
Yeah, no, that is superb. Like having a structured interview feedback is so key. And also not just the open-ended questions, right? I mean, not just the closed-ended questions. You want open-ended questions. I feel like the one thing that has worked very well for us, and I don't know if others do it as well, is where when we ask people to give feedback in the interviews, it always has to be facts and not feeling. So if you're going to say that I felt XYZ, the candidate did not come with whatever that feedback might be, it's like it should not be in the language of I felt. It should be more factual. Like, let's talk about actually what happened. So that then remove that inherent bias. Yeah. Sebastian, how about you?
Yeah, that's a great point. I got to think about another thing, which is like another just lifting the mindset around this question is to just tell the company or like raise the awareness in the company, like Jason said, that if your funnel is like all the people you went to school with in the same school, that's extremely comfortable. You know what you're getting, and that's maybe great in that way, but you're sort of narrowing the funnel a lot. But if you go to the approach that we just discussed with spreading it up and just focusing on skills that are important for the company, the funnel suddenly becomes really wide. And if you just focus on these things that we talked about, then you have a lot of potential to really find great fitting people who you really need, instead of getting a person that fits in culturally, that you maybe squeeze something round into a peg hole.
Yeah, right, makes sense. We'll switch gears a little bit. This is a question where, again, it's around like screening for soft skills. So, professional skills, experience, and knowledge can be screened for somewhat objectively during a recruitment process. But how do you screen for key soft skills? And what do you mean by soft skills? Sebastian, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, exactly. It's been a thought that I've had lately. So, like the hard skills, let's say, are you good at JavaScript? Like we sort of evolved that a little bit over time in a good way. Like we maybe figured out, at least most of us, that, doing whiteboard coding and not allowing syntax errors might be a bit strict. That's not really a really good way to measure how good someone is at their everyday work, where they have an editor that's helping you. So there we sort of refined that part to sort of narrow down, maybe, of course, not perfect, but a lot closer to the goal. Like, okay, I can score this person on how good they are technically on different criteria. But soft skills are a little bit harder, like how humble is this person, or how focused are they on business requirements, or these kind of soft skills. That's a lot harder. Like, I don't feel like there's been a progression from Stone Age to something better like it's been in the technical part. It's still very much gut feeling, and the only thing that I've sort of come up with as tools, and that's why I'm interested in hearing what other people on the panel have to say, like you can have proxy questions to the person. Are you a humble person? Yes, always. Like that doesn't work. You have to have like answers or questions around that, but also, of course, the references that you talk to, like external people, then you can also ask them proxy and maybe even more direct questions, keeping in mind that they pick their best reference, of course. But like, does anyone have any other thoughts on how to narrow in on this and get less of a gut feeling and a little bit more measurable soft skills?
Yeah. No, for sure. I feel like, it is not straightforward. Olga, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and something that comes up to my mind is like, I've done this type of the interview. We call it ability to learn and teach. So this is the one where we mostly get an understanding of how the person is functioning, how they explain, certain topics to another person, how they collaborate with the people whose working style is completely different from theirs. So, we get to see how, maybe an introverted person explains something to extroverted person and vice versa, right? And so you also see stuff, qualities like you mentioned, Sebastian, like humility, because, it comes across fairly, straightforward in those types of interviews. So that's one of the things that, I thought about.
Jason?
So I think Olga just also landed on something really interesting, which is that I think a lot of the soft skills, I think we talk about soft skills as a proxy for skills that can't be tested in an interview. But as she just mentioned, some soft skills can be tested in an interview. The ability to explain, the ability to learn something on the fly. A lot of the times these are soft skills, but they're still things you can perfectly well ask somebody to do in an interview. I think some of the ones that we really are looking at is some of these non-testable skills or traits, kind of, like we're talking about humility. And one of the things I like to do is, one, figure out how do we move this from a personality trait to a behavior they're observing? Because it's not that we need someone to be humble. I honestly don't mind if I hire the most arrogant jerk if they can act like they are a reasonable and humble person at the office all the time. I never need to know that secretly they're just like, I'm the best. I don't need to know that if it doesn't show through in their behavior. So what are the behaviors we don't want? And with that, we've got this whole field of behavioral interviewing, which is the space of like asking questions about what is a time when you did this? Tell me a story about a time when you did that, which they still feel weird to me to ask, but I've also read a ton of the research. They're reasonably validated. They work because people tend to not be able to put together a coherent mental model of a story that explains why they took the behaviors they took if they aren't behaviors they will take. And that's also the key thing there. Look up the info on it. I can't go into it all, but the key thing is not what would you do, but what did you do? What have you done in the past is kind of the heart of the behavioral questions. So between those two things, like, can you make the soft skill something you can test in the interview, or can you find a behavioral interview that gets at the behaviors you want to see? But again, it comes back to, I guess, probably my drum I keep hammering is you need to know what you're looking for ahead of time, because these questions are hard to make up on the fly. You need to know, like, what are the key behavioral traits we need to see in this person?
Yep. No, 100%. I personally love behavioral questions, and especially I like it where it's like, it almost always is, I want you to give me an example, right? I don't want you to give me your philosophy, but give me an example on how you were in such a situation where you kind of understand how the person behaved. We don't do this quite often now, considering like most of our interviews are in Zoom. But one thing I recall, this is like a long time ago when I was going in for an interview. I was told that when you go in and check in, when it's an in-person interview, you will check in with the receptionist. And that receptionist was actually part of the whole interview. They would always ask the receptionist, how did this person behave when they came in? So that kind of was another way of, kind of checking what is the attitude. But I feel like you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like, what is the attitude you're looking for? What is it that on your team you are looking for the most? Are you looking for a learner? Are you looking for a leader? What are those behavioral attributes that you need that person to have to be successful on your team? So if we know that, it makes it so much easier. But this is a fantastic topic. Like, again, this is another one where you can just have a whole panel just discussing this. So awesome.
If Lead Dev wants to bring us all back for a topic on behavioral interviewing, I mean, I won't say no. This is a great topic. I love this material. So thank you for asking this question.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. Let us change gears again a little bit. Kind of more, right now, again, with the market changing, there are some roles that are not being, that are not as easily, you don't find people hiring for those roles. I'm kind of curious, in your organizations, what are those roles that have stayed resilient throughout the ups and downs of market, if any?
So I cannot speak for my organization, but if either Olga or Sebastian has an answer, I have some data that I can quickly look into while we're talking.
I would love to hear on the data. But yeah, Sebastian, Olga, do you have any such roles that you've seen, or has it stayed fairly stable for you? Like, it hasn't really mattered with the market?
I would say that rare skills has been unproportionately spared, like roles that are hard to find currently, like data scientists, engineers, those kind of things. And but on the flip side, engineers are not as spared as they traditionally have been. And what I've seen with my peers in other organizations is something that surprised me, and maybe that's a gateway into what Jason is about to say, that leaders has been relatively unspared. Like usually it's some kind of ratio there that is maintained, but I've seen that more leaders get to go, and organizations gets flattened out or flattened down, and leaders has to take on more personnel responsibility. But that's just personal observation. So I would love to hear more on that.
So I've found my data. Basically, I have commissioned some research through, I believe, Harris Poll, which we talked with a bunch of tech leaders about their organization, what's going on, a kind of wide-scale survey. And one of the things I've got here is the top priority roles for hiring in different organizations. And then we broke them down. We basically ended up, as part of the data analysis, we bucketed these into folks that are feeling very high performing in their hiring. So folks that are confident they're going to meet their hiring goals, confident the caliber of engineers they're hiring, which was about a third of participants ended up in this upper confidence bucket, and folks that were not feeling great about their hiring, that were not confident in what they were doing, which is about 2/3 of the participants in the survey. And one of the things that's really interesting is what I'm seeing is the top 3 roles across are data analysts, cloud architects, and data engineers, which really fits with what Sebastian's saying about specialist roles. But those top folks, the leaders who are most confident that their hiring is succeeding, overwhelmingly, they're much stronger looking for software generalists still. And I think that's really interesting, that one of the things we see is folks want to hire these specialists, but I think the folks that feel like their organization is on the rails and like are actually succeeding at their hiring goals are the ones who are hiring up people who have the high-level skills they need and then training them to the key skills they need. Like recognizing that, the core skill of a software developer is becoming the tool we need to be. Like we reshape ourselves all the time into the right developer for the fit. I did not go into my career expecting to be working in big data, but hell, I don't know if big data existed when I entered my career, but I certainly it showed up, and so it became a tool that I became good at. But who knows what tool I'll become good at next? I'm a developer. I learn tools.
No, thanks for sharing the data, because that is very interesting. And I feel like inherently, like when we are hiring, we typically do hire for the learning and adaptability, right? You don't necessarily hire just for technical skills, because to your point, Jason, technical needs change. We are ever evolving. And even the fact that data is at the top is also kind of the signs of the time right now. And who knows, 5 years down the line, what's going to be? It might be AI. Who knows what it will be like? But in the end, it's about that constant changing and making sure that we're upgrading our skills. If no one has anything else to say, I wanted to kind of switch a little bit. There was one piece that we were talking during our prep that I thought would be great for this panel to talk through. And it was essentially, just some hiring practices that are different based on region. So in this situation, me and Jason, we both are from the US. Olga, you're in Italy, and Sebastian, you're in Sweden. So there is kind of just inherently some differences between the way hiring practices are. I would love if you all can touch a little bit on your experiences, and if you have experience in hiring in different regions in the world, if there is something that you've noticed as being inherently different in the way hiring is approached. Go ahead, Olga.
Yeah, so actually I'm based in the US, and so I'm just right now in Italy, but to correct you. But really what I've noticed is that, we had several hiring candidates come from different countries. So there is certain, of course, there is different time zones, and you have to adjust to that. The process, of course, stays the same, but I think what always is on my mind as an interviewer and a hiring manager is the actual culture fit. And like, are these people from different cultures and different countries going to be successful in a, big US organization? So that has been an interesting experience, to be honest. I've seen, positive and negative experiences with those types of candidates, but it's something that, I would suggest to anybody to actually actively be thinking about, because it's really it's a really major factor.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian?
Yeah, I have some interesting maybe identifications I've done to take to spark some conversation. I'm from Sweden, but I also lived in Germany for a few years, and I also worked for a UK company. So I've been doing interviews and recruitment across those three regions. And some things that I've seen is that might shock people from the outside is that, or might or might not surprise people, is that Germany is, of course, very maybe known to some people for being very focused on the education and background within like formal education, while Sweden is completely the opposite. Like, it's extremely rare that someone is explicitly asking for any kind of level of official education. So that's one thing. I think Britain is a little bit in between, maybe more towards the more strict part. I think that's one important thing that people might not know. One thing I have identified as very interesting is that the UK people that I've interviewed and recruited quite a lot in my time, they were all very open and prepared to do code tests, while in Sweden, at least half of the people that I've interviewed are shocked. Even in the moment of doing a booked code test, sitting there, they're all surprised, like, well, okay, I'm gonna actually like do a code test, and I find that interesting. I'm not sure what conclusions I've drawn yet, but it seems like Jason has some ideas.
I just, again, thank you. While I was listening to you, I also just quickly pulled research again. I know one of the things that I found really interesting is we've actually done some research on in what cities are people likely to succeed at tech interviews, because of course we're conducting interviews globally. And one of the really interesting things that we saw is like, I think a lot of folks think about like San Francisco as a benchmark because of the Silicon Valley there. But like there's a cluster, San Francisco, London, New York City, Boston, Seattle, all of these kind of places we think of as tech. But there are 4 cities on my list that outperformed all of them that were very surprising, which is Singapore, Tokyo, Vancouver, and Toronto. So one of the things I find really interesting is, again, our intuition about where you can find good developers is not that strong. And then the other thing is, this list is full of cities in India. So there is a ton of great development talent in India, but it just isn't quite, as a city hitting that, which, again, probably there's also a little bit of an effect of number of interviews. I think the fact that there is so much development going on in India might be diluting the, this particular measurement. So I don't want to downplay India for that, but they are also like all over the top 15 here. So I just found that really interesting that like these cities, the traditional cities that I think we think about, again, our stereotypes are wrong because there's these other cities that are, Singapore is number 1 by a good margin in our data, which is fascinating to me.
What is the definition of that these cities are successful? Like, is that easily explainable?
Yes, percentage of developers performing in the top quartile of technical interviews.
But are the expectations maybe different between these cities?
No, because we conduct all the interviews. Okay, so we have that. That's one nice thing is like this is why I love what I do working at a company that does interviews is I get data about interviews that it's very hard to get otherwise because you need to conduct zillions of interviews, and we do. So that's really cool. And I will put this stuff in the hiring channel. I'm holding on to both the trends report that I linked and the blog post I've got with these top 20 cities.
Yeah, perfect. Now that'll be great. I think we do have a little bit of time to kind of take some Q&A. I'm going to look at our Q&A. I feel like there is one question over here. It is with the ping-ponging of remote work to back to office policies that is occurring in the US. What are some ways you're anticipating the hiring processes to change in the near future while this gets sorted out? Go ahead, Jason.
So I can't say how I anticipate it changing in the future, but I can say how we've seen it changing recently, which is that even as the industry has contracted and even as the things are moving a little bit more towards in person, we're still seeing the speed and basically movement associated with a fully virtual process. So I think a lot of folks are still using a highly virtual process because it's just really efficient. You can get people on together. You don't need to physically co-locate somebody. You don't need to find times that necessarily fit not only against all your people, but against a conference room. And I think people are used to it. And also, honestly, the ergonomics of particularly technical interviews are kind of better remote because otherwise you need to figure out how you're going to get somebody set up with a development environment if you want them to code. Whereas you can generally assume that somebody's calling in from their development environment if you've told them they're going to be coding. So I don't think we're going to see a big change away from particularly the first half of the interview process where we're kind of skill assessing being done virtually. We might see some return to in-person for later portions of it, but I think virtual interviewing is probably here to stay.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Like, I'm not seeing any major changes or nothing where it says that we are trying to go back to in-person interviews. I do think it depends on what position you're hiring for. Some positions obviously would, be more in person, but then for the most part, I would feel in engineering, at least what I'm seeing is most of them are still virtual. Olga, how about you? Are you seeing kind of a similar thing?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. I just wanted to kind of echo and plus one that. And I think that, speaking of predictions, I'll be so bold and to say we'll stay hybrid for a very long time, and there'll be a lot of people that just, not going to be, just like the working from home environment. And so that, logically means that we will be continuing conducting our interviews remotely.
I think you can't get the cat back in the bag on that one, but it's also not mutually exclusive. You can also if you have a 3-step process, you can decide on what step maybe is more important to meet in person. Like if you have a cultural fit step, then maybe that one is really good to do in person, or maybe decide to do that early to catch anything, like we said, to break the process early if something is not working out. And I think maybe one thing to keep in mind, maybe undertone in the question, like there's a lot of about the prediction of the future. We hear a lot, and it's very loud when a few big companies are changing their policy, but they're few and loud, and I don't think that reflects sort of the overall direction things are going. So yeah, of course you can win the lottery or lose the lottery, and your company against all odds will completely go in one extreme direction, but I'm not sure that reflects the normal reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will say we just have 1 minute left. I wanted to just have some closing thoughts. Thank you so much, Jason, Sebastian, and Olga, for this wonderful discussion. It's been great. I took down some really key points that I wanted to sum up with some of the things that you all were saying. I'm going to kind of read it just so that I know what I'm saying. Like I'm saying it exactly with what I was writing down as you were saying it. So one of the things that key pieces that I felt that I'm taking away is, being very clear on what you need before you start the interview process or before you start the hiring process. It will evolve, which is okay, but kind of having, it's good to be grounding in some specifics. So I love that point because it's like knowing what you're going into. That was amazing. Another one was it's not about doing more with less, right? It's about finding what are the appropriate things that you should do. So Jason, I love the fact where you were saying it's like, what are some things that you could potentially not necessarily have in your hiring process? What can you outsource? What can you have done differently in the hiring process specifically, which I thought was like really, really neat. We spoke about structured interview feedback as well, which is amazing, which again, let it not be very closed-ended, let it be open-ended, and let's talk about it in terms of facts and not feelings. So this has been an interesting, like, it's a topic that, again, you can talk endlessly. But we have only as much time as we have. So again, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. For those of you who joined us from all over the world, we really appreciate it, and we look forward to any more. We will head over to the Slack channel /hiring in the lead dev Slack area enterprise. So please meet us there and have a great, wonderful day. Talk to you all soon.